Imagine a city so wealthy, the streets literally smelled of cinnamon and gold. A city that controlled the trade of 3 continents before London or Paris were even players. This was Lisbon, 1750. The new Rome. The glittering gateway to the world. But in just 102 minutes, this entire empire was erased. Not by an invading army. Not by a revolution. But by the earth itself. In one single morning, the wealthiest city on the planet was crushed, drowned, and burned until nothing remained but ash and ghosts. But here's the mystery. The tragedy that should have ended Portugal actually gave birth to the modern world. How does a city die in an hour and then use its own ruins to invent the future? To understand the fall, you have to feel the height. In the early 1700s, Lisbon was the fourth largest city in Europe. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and sensory-overloading labyrinth of 200,000 people. If you stood on the banks of the Tagus River back then, you wouldn't see water. You'd see a forest of masts. It was said the ships were so tightly packed, you could cross the river by jumping from deck to deck without ever getting your feet wet. Why? Because Lisbon was the beating heart of a global machine. They held the keys to 5 pillars of supremacy that made the rest of Europe jealous. Pillar 1. The spice link. While others struggled, Portugal owned the East. Pepper, cloves, and cinnamon flowed through Lisbon's warehouses, sold to a hungry Europe at prices that made kings weep. Pillar 2. White gold. Through Macau, they had a near monopoly on Chinese porcelain. Every aristocratic house in London craved what Lisbon controlled. Pillar 3. The African connection. Ivory, rare woods, and gold from Angola and Mozambique fueled the city's coffers. But the fourth pillar? That was the real game changer, the Brazilian gold boom. In 1695, they found it. A literal river of gold in Minas Gerais. Over 1,000 tons of gold and millions of carats of diamonds flooded into these docks. Lisbon wasn't just wealthy. It was the world's primary creditor. But there was a dark side to this glitter. A secret the king was hiding in the vaults of the Ribeira Palace. This was the Ribeira Palace. For 250 years, it was the administrative brain of the empire. Inside, it held something more valuable than gold: the roteiros. These were classified nautical maps, the 18th century equivalent of nuclear launch codes. They contained secret navigation data for the world's oceans. If you had these maps, you owned the world. If you lost them, the empire was blind. King João V spent his riches creating a spectacle of Baroque excess. He turned his royal chapel into a shimmering hall of silver to impress the Pope. But while the king sat in his palace of gold, the city around him was a ticking time bomb. Lisbon was a city of extreme contrasts. It was the new Rome with 40 grand churches, but it lacked a sewage system. The stench of Lisbon was legendary. People threw waste out of windows into the same streets where diamonds were traded. It was a medieval labyrinth trying to hold a modern empire. And on November 1st, 1755, the labyrinth collapsed. It was All Saints' Day, a day of obligation. Nearly every person in the city was squeezed inside a church. Thousands of candles were lit on every altar. The air was thick with incense and prayer. At 9:40 a.m., a low rumble started. At first, people thought it was a heavy carriage passing by. Then the sound changed. It became a roar like 1,000 cannons firing at once. This wasn't just an earthquake. It was a massive undersea rupture, estimated today at a staggering 9.0 on the Richter scale. The shaking lasted for 6 minutes. Think about that. 6 minutes of the ground turning into liquid. In the great churches like the Carmel convent, the heavy stone roofs did exactly what they weren't designed to do. They imploded. Thousands of worshippers were crushed instantly under the weight of their own sanctuary. Those who could move ran. They clawed through the dust and the screams, heading for the only open space they could find, the riverfront. The massive stone quays of the Ribeira. They stood there, thousands of them, gasping for air, looking back at a city that had turned into a graveyard of dust. And then someone noticed something terrifying. The water was disappearing. The Tagus River was receding, pulling back into the Atlantic, leaving the seabed bone dry. The survivors watched in confusion. Some walked out onto the mud to look at the lost treasures revealed by the retreating tide. They didn't know that the ocean was just catching its breath. 40 minutes after the shaking stopped, a sound like a freight train came from the mouth of the river. A wall of water, 30 feet high, was racing toward the city. The earthquake had done its job. Now it was the tsunami's turn. It smashed into the Ribera district with enough force to capsize massive galleons. Those who had fled the falling buildings to find safety by the water were simply gone in seconds. But even as the water retreated, taking the city's wealth with it, a third monster was waking up. Remember those thousands of candles lit for All Saints' Day? They had fallen into the wooden ruins. In the dry November wind, the small flickers turned into a firestorm. For 5 days, Lisbon didn't just burn. It melted. The gold of the palaces liquefying and running through the gutters like water. The secret maps of the Roteros? Ash. The Royal Library's 70,000 books? Dust. 85% of the city was gone. The wealthiest city in the world had been crushed, drowned, and incinerated in a single morning. But as the smoke cleared, the survivors faced a question that would change human history forever. If God is good, why did he just destroy his most devout city on his holiest day? The answer to that question would end the Middle Ages and start the Enlightenment. But first, the king's prime minister had to deal with a city of 60,000 corpses. And his solution was unlike anything the world had ever seen. While the king, Jose I, was literally shaking with a newfound phobia of stone walls moving. His entire court into a city of luxury tents, one man stood in the ashes. Sebastião José de Carvalho y Melo. History knows him as the Marquês de Pombal. Legend says that as the nobility wept and the priests screamed that the end of the world had come, Pombal looked at the carnage and uttered 5 words that changed the course of Portugal. Bury the dead, feed the living. Pombal wasn't just a politician. He was a cold, calculating machine of the Enlightenment. He didn't see a tragedy, he saw a blank canvas. The old Lisbon was a mess of medieval alleys and church-owned property. It was inefficient, it was dirty, it was old. Pombal did something unthinkable in the 1700s. He ignored the property lines of the church. He ignored the titles of the nobility. He declared the entire center of the city, the Baixa, to be state property. He didn't want to rebuild Lisbon. He wanted to engineer it. He gathered the greatest military architects and gave them a mission. Build a city that the earth can never kill again. This is the Gaiola Pombalina, the Pombaline cage. Centuries before modern engineering, Pombal's team invented the world's first earthquake-resistant building technique. It was a flexible wooden frame built into the masonry. The idea? If the earth shakes, the wood flexes. The building sways, but it doesn't snap. To test it, Pombal didn't use math. He used the army. He had battalions of soldiers march in rhythmic, heavy steps around the models to simulate the seismic waves of a 9.0 earthquake. If the model fell, the architect was fired. If it stood, they built the city. But it wasn't just about safety, it was about speed. He standardized everything. Those beautiful azulejos tiles you see all over Lisbon today. They weren't just for art. Pombal ordered them mass-produced to cover up the cheap, fast-setting mortar of the reconstruction. He replaced the dark, winding alleys with wide, straight boulevards. Why? Because wide streets allow for air, light, and more importantly for a dictator, the easy movement of troops to crush any riots. But while the city was rising from the mud, a psychological war was breaking out across Europe. You see, 1755 was a religious crisis. The earthquake happened on a Catholic holiday, destroyed the churches, but crucially left the red light district almost untouched. In Paris, the philosopher Voltaire was horrified. He wrote a famous poem mocking the idea that we live in the best of all possible worlds. If God was in control, why kill the innocent children in the pews while the criminals in the taverns survived? The Lisbon earthquake effectively killed the era of blind religious optimism. It forced humanity to look for natural causes instead of divine punishment. This event was the spark that turned the Enlightenment from a coffee shop debate into a global reality, and Pombal used this shift to crush his enemies. For centuries, the Inquisition had ruled Lisbon with fear. They burned heretics right here in the Rocio Square. But Pombal saw the Inquisition as a shadow over his modern city. He stripped them of their power. He kicked the Jesuits out of the country. He turned the site of the Inquisition's headquarters into a national theater. He was telling the world, the age of the priest is over. The age of the merchant has begun. And this was his masterpiece. Look at the square. Before 1755, this was the site of the royal palace, the king's home. By building a massive open square here and naming it Commerce Square, Pombal was sending a message to every ship that entered the Tagus. Portugal is no longer a kingdom of gold-hoarding royals. We are a modern mercantile nation. In the center stands King Ozai, but look closely at what his horse is doing. It is trampling snakes. In the 18th century, the snake was the symbol of chaos and the earthquake. The statue is a permanent reminder that human reason and order had triumphed over the raw, destructive power of nature. But you can't engineer away the soul of a city. If you leave the straight lines of Pombal's Baixa and climb the hills into the Alfama, you find a Lisbon that refused to change. The Alfama is the only district that mostly survived. It is a medieval maze that the tsunami couldn't reach and the fire couldn't swallow. In the 1700s, this was a place of gallegos, the water carriers who hauled the city's lifeblood up these steep hills. It was the birthplace of fado, the music of longing. The Portuguese have a word that has no direct translation. Saudade. It's a deep emotional state of nostalgic longing for something or someone that is gone forever. Some say Saudade was born on the morning of November 1st, 1755, a permanent scar on the Portuguese soul for the golden Lisbon that was swallowed by the sea. This is the Carmo convent today. Pombal wanted to tear it down and rebuild it, but the people refused. They left it exactly like this, a skeleton of stone. It stands as a reminder that no matter how much gold you have, no matter how many secret maps you hide, and no matter how grand your palaces are, everything can change in 6 minutes. Lisbon's story isn't just about an earthquake. It's a story of resilience. It's the story of a city that saw the end of the world and decided to keep going. Today, Lisbon is once again one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But when you walk these streets, remember you are walking on top of a buried empire. Every straight line was paid for in ash. Every tile was a response to a tragedy. And every stone in the Praça do Comércio is a victory over the dark. Lisbon rose from the fire to become the first modern city of the Enlightenment. But what happens when a city doesn't rise? What happens when an empire's secrets are buried so deep that history itself forgets where they are? If you want to see us uncover the sunken secrets of another lost world, perhaps the underwater palaces of Cleopatra's, Alexandria, or the silent streets of Edo period Japan, let us know in the comments. The history of power is written in stone, but it's remembered by those who look closer. I'm Roni, and this is History and Power Explained. Thanks for watching.